everyone! I'm finally gonna do some videos about living in Japan, and I thought I would do a My Positive Birth story to start. It wasn't all positive, but I'm going to talk about how I went into labor, and then about the actual birth, and then what happened afterwards, as you can see in the title, Postpartum Psychosis. Just a little bit, I'm going to talk about that. So, let me get the baby! Okay, look at this, she was just born! I made the video right after. Yeah, and so you can tell that I'm really lazy, and I finally got my act together 6 months later to make this video for you guys. Okay, here we go. For the birthing plan, everything went according to plan. I wanted a separate room because of COVID. It was the middle of the pandemic, and I wanted an epidural, and I wanted to be able to hold my baby afterwards, and I wanted to be trained to breastfeed her. Did that, everything was great. The clinic, we chose a small clinic, 15 minutes by car from where we live, and it was, and it was a birthing center, and it was one of the only places that had an epidural, because in Japan it's really hard to find places that'll be willing to give an epidural for some reason. Okay, so I'll talk about how I went into labor. I think I started somewhere in the wee early morning, late hours of the night, somewhere around 4 or even no, but like I started to notice that it was labor around 5:30 a.m. but I was having contractions slowly somewhere early in the morning, and by 5:30 a.m. I was pretty sure I was going into labor. So it was nice because I could kind of sleep on and off as the contractions started to get stronger and stronger. 5:30 a.m. I still didn't want to wake him up, and I let him sleep a little bit more, and I tried to go back to sleep as much as I could whenever I could, and then around 8 o'clock, I went to the bathroom, and I had a really small bloody show, and I was like, okay, so I'm pretty sure that I'm in labor. And then I woke him up, and then I was like, I'm not 100% sure. We had an app that said for every 5 minutes you should definitely go to the hospital, and it was, my contractions were every 5 minutes apart, right?
Already.
My contractions were already 5 minutes apart, which is really quickly. If it's actually 8 minutes apart, you should go to the hospital, right? And they're already 5 minutes apart. So around 7:30 I had my bloody show, but I wasn't sure whether my water broke or not because I didn't know what it would feel like, and it felt like something was coming out, but I guess it was just the bloody show, but the actual blood was a really small amount. But my water broke. I knew that it was breaking when I was in the delivery room, and in the delivery room I could feel something come out, so that was when it broke, which was nice, so the doctor didn't have to poke it and open it up. And also I took a shower, because they say you should take a shower before you go to the hospital so you feel comfortable and you're clean and everything. And I tried to eat breakfast. I only had a few bites of something, but my husband was able to eat a full breakfast, so he got a full breakfast in before we went to the hospital. So that's nice. So in Japan, a lot of people don't have cars, and we don't have a car because public transportation is easy, and it's really expensive to have a car, because you have to pay for parking everywhere you go and have a parking place that you pay for. So we reserved a maternity taxi. A driver is used to women in labor and taking them to the hospital. At the hospital, I was already 5 minutes apart, and the doctor was like, okay, you're doing great. Should we get you that epidural that you reserved? And I was thinking I wanted to maybe try to give birth without an epidural and see if I could do it, but the contractions were getting stronger and more intense, and I was thinking, can I wait a little bit longer? And the doctor was like, you probably shouldn't wait because your contractions are progressing really quickly. I asked to call my husband back into the operation room because of COVID. He had to be in a separate room like all the time. So that was great. And he said, yeah, I think he looked at my face and he saw I was trying to like count through my contractions to wait until they're over, and I was really intense, and he saw I was in a lot of pain, so he was like, okay, you should get the epidural. Definitely 100% agree that you should. And I said, okay, I'll do it. People don't want to get the epidural because they're afraid of needles, but when you're in labor and going through contractions, that needle, I didn't even feel it because I was so ready to get my epidural and so happy to do that, and I was just so concentrating on my contractions. So they put the needle in just in case. He put it in, but he didn't feed any medicine through the tube to my back until I had to walk back to the delivery room. And that was really hard because my contractions were getting really strong by then, and I was so happy I decided to get the epidural. It was so wonderful. It made all of my contractions not go away. It made me feel none of my contractions anymore. But they don't give you a strong dose for a long amount of time, so it starts to fade away, and then you start to feel the contractions again, and then I'm like, oh no, and then I called the nurse back in and I said, please give me more of the epidural medicine. And then so I had to do that about 3 times. So I finally started my first dose of the epidural around 10:20, and it was about 3 centimeters dilated at that point, and we decided to call our families to let them know that we were in labor. And it was so interesting because my sister had a dream that I was going into labor, and then when my husband called his dad said, oh, I also had a dream that you were going into labor. And what's crazy is I really did not want to be induced, because I hear that it's really painful if you're induced, and they were planning on inducing me 3 days before my delivery date. I mentally told myself I want to go into labor either the 10th or the 11th, and I went into labor on the 10th. It's crazy. You can mentally make yourself go into labor. I thought that was so cool. So around 11:30 I called my parents and I could relax because I had the epidural and we were just chatting, and then around 12 I had lunch, and that was nice. They have really good food at that hospital. Around 12:30 I was 5 centimeters dilated, and then around 1:30 I had really crazy, I think the dose of the epidural was wearing off and my contractions were getting really strong. Around 2 o'clock I was around 5 centimeters dilated, and the nurse came in and said, you'll probably have your baby tonight. And then 2:55 the nurse came back and said, whoa, you're already fully dilated, we have to get ready to give birth already. So within 1 hour, I guess during the time between the epidural, a strong dose of the epidural, I was able to progress really fast. Okay, and then at 4:42 I gave birth. The doctor came in and my birthing canal was too small for her big head, so the doctor had the choice of either pushing the baby through my birthing canal by pushing down aggressively on my stomach, or getting a vacuum to suck it out. And so he decided to randomly just like push it, and that really surprised me. He said, okay, push, and I'm gonna push. I was like, what? You're gonna push? So I went, and he went, ah. So that was interesting, and that was able to get her through a little bit. And I needed to get an episiotomy also, which was what I was afraid of, but it was totally fine because everything was numb down there, completely numb. So I didn't feel anything, and he sewed it up nicely afterwards. So that was okay. Yeah. So here is my labor timeline. As you can see, my labor was around 12 to 14 hours, but it felt more like 8 or 9 hours, which is nice, kind of faster than average. I want to say also, after the epidural, you shouldn't walk as much as possible. Be careful when you walk because you're completely numb for at least a few hours. One of the nice tips that I got from one of the nurses is I was leaning back and talking to my mom, and the nurse came in and said, no, you should lean forward to allow the baby to go down through the birthing canal. And so I did that, and that really helped progress my labor. After you give birth, they're going to take the baby away to do the APGAR test or whatever it's called, and do tests on it and weigh it and clean it. And actually, they didn't tell me this, but they kept her away for a whole night, and I kept wondering, when are they going to bring her back? So make sure you know why the baby's gone, and make sure you completely understand your birthing plan, because I couldn't rest. I kept wondering where my baby was. They did that on purpose to allow me to get rest for the night, so I should have asked about that beforehand. Okay, and then so I gave birth at around 4:30, and then 4:44.
4:54.
Okay, and then around 4:54, the placenta came out, and it was one of the biggest placentas the doctor had ever seen. So this leads into my next part of my story, which is about 3 days later, I started to have postpartum psychosis and go crazy. It was basically like I was experiencing a nightmare. So I remembered it, and I was acting crazy and doing weird things as if I were in a nightmare. There's several theories as to what caused postpartum psychosis. Maybe a big placenta was one of them, because it was really affecting my hormones, and then suddenly losing a big placenta that'll create a huge hormone change. So they did a blood test while I was going through the psychosis, and saying that I had basically 0 levels of serotonin, and so that was shocking for them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and then another theory, which we actually believe is the real reason, is that postpartum psychosis is genetic. And while I was in the next hospital for 1 month, my husband was researching it and asking all my family members, do you have anyone who has gone crazy in the family? And on my dad's side, someone has had an episode before. So we think it might be genetic, which is really sad, because it's like there's nothing I could have done. Other people think that it was the epidural that caused postpartum psychosis, but anyway, for me, we think it was genetic. But I'm better now, and we're all better now, so that's nice, right? Okay.